All right. Sean just took off to go check on something in the back. He'll be right back in a second. How you doing tonight, everybody? This is Alan Ulrich here, and welcoming you to Under the Dome.
All
There,
right.
there's Sean right there. Um, yeah, tonight's show is kind of ironically entitled "It's the Stick Song, the Best of Times." Um, but we're going to talk about, since we talked last week about the best Saints draft classes, we're going to talk about the worst Saints draft classes, the worst of times. And I started to write this in the teaser for the show, but I changed my mind. Um, we're not going to go into the John Mecom draft classes because when Mecom owned the team, picking on those draft classes is a lot like picking on the special needs child, in your class. It's just not, that's not cool. I mean, it's not, you don't bully the weakest person in the class. You just don't. I mean, that's not funny or anything like that. So,
Well,
we
drafting
might,
back, Saints draft classes back then was like a smorgasbord of ineptitude.
oh, D-Day was always doomsday when it came to draft classes because, you know, like, okay, let's just throw this out there. The first ever draft for the Saints in 1967. They did it just like, for those of you who remember how Carolina got their draft and the Cleveland Browns and they came back in the Houston Texans. You got to pick at the beginning of the round and you got to pick at the end of the round. So the Saints' number one overall pick in the 67 draft, they traded to Baltimore so they can get Gary Quazzo. Well, the Colts selected Bubba Smith. With the final pick in that 67 draft, they got Les Kelly, who played linebacker and fullback for the Saints, but he never started a single game. He rarely appeared in any games, and he was gone by 68 or 69. So, I mean, that's the kind of, or in 1974 or 75, I think it's 75, the Saints selected, I'm going to just double check myself because this is my gold standard for Saints draft ineptitude in that era. It was 75. No, 74. Saints selected Rick Middleton with the 13th pick of the 74 draft. Now, for those of you scoring at home, the 1974 draft for the Pittsburgh Steelers was, we talked about this last week, Lynn Swann, Jack Lambert, John Stallworth, and Mike Webster, all Hall of Famers. It's considered best draft class in NFL history because you have 4 Hall of Famers within the first 5 or 6 picks they did that year. The Steelers had. And then you get the Dirty Dozen from the Dallas Cowboys, which helped them go to the Super Bowl in 76. And the Dirty Dozen for the Cowboys was, I want to make sure I get all this right because it was, let me see, Dallas Cowboys. I want to say it's a 75 draft class. Yeah. Okay. So they had 12 picks that made that team. They were, 14 rookies made the team, but it was 7 draft choices, 4 undrafted free agents, and 2 obtained from trades, 1 claim off of waivers. So they were called the Dirty Dozen class. They were, and we're going to go through this real quick, Randy White, Hollywood Henderson, Pat Donovan, Scott Laidlaw, Percy Howard. We're not going to really count him. and I want to say, didn't Drew Pearson come in there? No, it's Preston Pearson. Preston Pearson. Um, all came out of that draft class. So, there's two teams. No wonder they dominated the NFL in the 70s. Meanwhile, the Saints drafted in 74 Rick Middleton, linebacker from Ohio State. His teammate, Randy Gradishar, went to the Denver Broncos at the very next pick. Same school, same position, linebacker. The Saints were looking at film at this guy all day long and took his teammate instead. Randy Gradishar should be a Hall of Fame player. He's in the Denver Broncos Ring of Honor.
I thought he was.
He's not in the Hall of Fame, no. He's not in the Hall of Fame. The only two players that actually did anything in that team, well, three players actually did anything on that team, that from the 74 draft class were Paul Seal, a tight end who was on the team until 1979. He got beat out eventually by Henry Charles in 76, but he actually was a halfway decent tight end. Joel Parker, a receiver, but his injuries ended his career. And Alvin Maxson, who was best known as probably the shortest Saints player until you got Darren Sproles. But that's about it. I mean, it was just a total disaster. So how do you draft in the first round the wrong linebacker? It's just a classic example how bad this team was back then. So there's no need. Yeah, Anna, did you see I put on your page when the show was the link to the show? Because like I told Sean before we went on the air, because I was off on Friday and so was Sean. Friday felt like Saturday for me, and Saturday felt like Sunday. So I totally get you feel like Monday is like Tuesday. Wait, hang on. I thought we were talking about Reno Hightower and the Taft. Oh yeah, there we go. Anyway, so I wanted to focus mainly on the drafts of the past 20 years, just to kind of narrow it down to some of the worst ever drafts. I don't really want to focus on the Mecom years. And, if we could talk about the 1987 draft class, because Sean Knight is probably one of the biggest draft busts in Saints history. And certainly the biggest draft bust, in my opinion, of the Tom Benson ownership era, because the guy only played 10 games, never started, got traded for another first round bust just to get rid of him. And he was out of the league in 3 years. Wow. By 1989, he was on his way out. He only started one game in 3 seasons. And was a number 1 draft pick. That you can't get much worse than that. But what was this? Oh, okay. What's that? Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out what the heck that was. All right. But before that, Sean, you saw the Carolina Panthers traded for Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
And now they can't wait to get rid of Teddy Bridgewater. They've given him the option to go and find a trade partner to see if someone wants to trade for Bridgewater. Are you surprised by any of this?
No. Carolina's wanted to cut bait with Bridgewater almost from the point that they got him. And it's really, that's kind of weird to me, because I would tend to argue that Bridgewater had a better season in Carolina than he did in New Orleans, probably because he played more. But when you are when they trade for Sam Darnold to you're the greater evil of those two, that's pretty much a sign that you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, the rumor is the Denver Broncos are interested in him because They have no confidence in Drew Lock. They're trying to wash their hands of all the bad Elway decisions. And it looks like the top 3 picks of this draft will be like the 71 draft class, where quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3. Which order they're going to go in, I'm not sure. I mean, Trevor Lawrence will be the first pick. But after that, is it going to be, the Brigham Young quarterback, then Mac Jones, or is it going to be Justin Fields, or is it going to be where's Trey Lance fit in this? How is this going to play out? And no, we're not. I'm not on the we want Teddy back. I didn't really. I'll be honest with you. I was not impressed with Teddy Bridgewater when he was here. I didn't like trading for him, and I certainly didn't think he was a starter for the Saints. I thought, and I still have this opinion, he is a very capable backup. Yeah. And he will have a long career as a backup who comes in and fills, can play for a little while and carry you over to your starter is ready to go.
Yeah. I agree completely.
Because if you go back to watch those games in 2019, where he started those 5 games, really, except for the Tampa game, I'm hard pressed to sit there and say, look at those games and think that was just a superior performance by a quarterback. I thought Luke McCown, in a loss to Carolina, played better than Teddy Bridgewater did in any of those 5 games.
Absolutely. Threw one bad pass the whole day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's arguable that wasn't – I think that was there were several factors in that together that made that play end up being what it was, because you had Brandon Cooks on a jump ball, and you had Josh Norman that made an incredible play on the ball as well.
Yeah.
I don't fault Luke for that at all.
I think if you weren't throwing to Brandon Cooks, who was 5'7", I think 5'7" or 5'8", you were throwing to say a Jimmy
Brandon
Graham
Coleman.
or Brandon Coleman.
6'6", and that's not who you throw to. Come on.
Or you're throwing to a Marcus Colston, someone who's big. And I name those. I mean, those players were big receivers. Up against Josh Norman, you put that ball up a lot higher. That's a touchdown. But he tried. Oh, Cooks is 5'10". Okay, yeah, yeah. So if you're throwing to a bigger receiver, that you can put that ball up high over Josh Norman, then that's a touchdown. We win that game. I mean, that's how good McCown played in that game. I thought Bridgewater benefited from great defense, almost historical level defense, Dallas Cowboys incompetence, and great special teams play against the Seattle Seahawks. He is what I think he is when I'm watching play. He's a guy who is going to take the high percentage short passes and live for another down. And he sees nothing wrong with punting. And if this was Jim Mora and Carl Smith, he is their dream quarterback. He really is. But that's not the kind of quarterback play that will win football games today. It'll win you 6, 7, 8, 9 games, maybe. You'll get in the playoffs, maybe. With an elite defense, you probably win 10 or 11 games. But you're not going to win a championship with it unless you have a Baltimore Ravens type of defense, an 85 Bears kind of defense. It's just not sustainable. And you have to have a running back that is a Derrick Henry type of running back.
Yeah.
Somebody
that's just going to pound that defense into submission.
Right.
Somebody that can put up 30, 35 carries a game.
Yeah, exactly.
And you only throw the ball when you have to.
You throw the ball 20 times in a game, and you complete 17 of the passes. So it's an ungodly percentage, but it's all yards after the catch. It's moving the chains. You have a great kicking game, and you win a lot of 20-17 kind of ball games or 24-17 kind of ball games. That's the kind of quarterback he is. That's the kind of team he is. Kind of team he needs to be on. So, I'll take Teddy back as a backup, but you got to realize that you've got to find a starter. He's not your starter. And like I always say, John Forcade won 3 games in 1989. He beat a Buffalo Bills team that's going to the playoffs, and they were a year away from becoming that team that went to 4 straight Super Bowls. He beat a Buddy Ryan Philadelphia Eagles team on Monday Night Football, knocked them out of the playoffs, and he beat the Indianapolis Colts with, I think, who was that? Paul Justin was a quarterback?
Paul George is basketball. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Jeff George.
No, Jeff George wasn't there yet, I don't think. He may have been. Now you got me curious. Let me see. But I could have sworn it was Justin. 1989. That's a good thing. You could find stats out on anything. This is what I end up doing sometimes when I write my historical posts. I kind of go back from memory and see what the score was and what happened in that game. Yeah, it was Christmas Eve, 1989. Saints won 41-6. Ron Meyer was the coach, and the Colts quarterback was Jack Trudeau. Okay. Jack Trudeau. Yep. Yeah, I think they took Jeff George in the 1990 or 91 draft class. Let's see. Jeff George. It seemed like the Colts were in the top 5 draft classes every year from like 1990 until Peyton Manning.
Until Peyton Manning.
Yeah. Jeff George was drafted. Oh, you gotta be kidding me. You're not gonna tell me what year he was drafted? It's so slow tonight. Sorry. 1990. Okay. Yeah. They drafted him in 1990. So he was drafted the following year. They had the number 1 overall pick. So, Mr. Mullet himself. So yeah. I mean, that's my take too. When it comes to Teddy Bridgewater, he's just going to be a good backup somewhere or a bridge guy between one starter and another. He's not your long-term answer, and I can see why the Panthers took Donald. He's still on a rookie contract, so he got a cheap contract. He's 24. You have a couple years you can sit there and try and figure out what you want to do with him without screwing your team over with a huge contract. And if he's not the answer, hell, cut him and then go get another one, you know? So it makes sense for them. Yes, Jeff George had the strongest arm. He also had the fastest release of a ball this side of Dan Marino.
Yeah.
But he was a total asshole to his teammate. I mean, there's no getting around it. I mean, that's what he was.
When that's the narrative on you to every team that you play for, you kind of got to wonder if it might not be true.
Oh, I mean, Saints fans, if you watch the game back in, what was it, 95 or 96? I think it was 95 on ESPN Sunday Night Football when he and June Jones got into it on the sideline because he didn't like the play calling. Yeah, I mean, that tells you.
Yeah. And you can't cultivate a personality like that when you're the leader on the field, because nobody is going to want to follow you.
No, and that was just it. He was not the kind of guy who was a rah-rah guy who, something happens that's bad and you're like, yeah, that's all right. We can come back. We can do something out of this. It's okay. Or my bad. I'll get you. I should have had you run the post. I saw it and I thought I could fit it in there. My bad, my mistake. And the reality was he was asshole. I mean, there's no other way, and the old George Carlin routine, how big of an asshole somebody is depends on how far away they are from you. And, a guy on TV is an asshole. But, if you're sitting next to somebody in the line, it's like, hey, this guy's an asshole over here. I mean, that's George Carlin.
He was brilliant.
Oh, one of my all-time favorite routines. There's a bunch of them. But, he's talking about, and I think about this all the time. He says, you're in your car, you got your radio going, the windshield, it's raining, the windshield wipers are going, there's a lot of traffic, you're stopping and you're watching people pass, and you get to where you're going, get out the car, try and, dodge the raindrops, go into the place, take care, do your business you got to do. You get back in the car, and the radio's just goddamn loud! And you're going... How could I listen to something that loud and not know it?
You know where his career started?
I've got a 8-track at home with him talking about Wonderful Wino Radio, which is a pretty old routine.
That was formulated and done for the first time in Shreveport.
Really?
Yeah, his first performing gig, as you could say, was at Barksdale Air Force Base.
Yeah, Wonderful Rhino Radio, WINO.
Wino.
That's it. That's the routine.
In Western Walla
Walla. Yeah. Yes, I have that 8-track at home of that comedy album. Yeah, that was a strange album. I will tell you that much. It's 2 sides of his face on it. One's red and one's blue. And yeah, I have that album. I have quite a few old comedy albums in various places. The first time I heard Red Fox's comedy album, that was unbelievable. I'd never heard people curse like that. This was before Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
I'm like 8 years old, and one of my best friends is playing this Red Fox album. And I'm thinking it's going to be Sanford and Son routines. I'm thinking it's going to be, jokes about Esther, that kind of what he says on that thing. Nope.
Which is really ironic to me because DeMond Wilson, who played Lamont on the show, was a very religious guy and went on to become an evangelist.
Yeah. And the lady who played Esther, LaWanda Williams, I think her name was.
Page.
LaWanda Page. She was a gospel singer, and she and Red Fox are really good friends.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting story to read between those two.
You watch a movie like Harlem Nights, and the lady on there, her name escapes me at the moment. But anyway, she had some of the saltiest dialogue in that entire movie, and she's an ordained minister.
Yeah. Yep. Well, some of the jokes that they told on Sanford and Son, you couldn't get away with today. I mean, and that was on TV.
Yeah.
So
Well,
just
you see all these memes this on social media now, and it said the reason that my generation was never offended, and it has Archie Bunker and Red Fox and George Jefferson and
oh yeah, yep. Yeah, he said he told LaWanda Page or Esther, he says, "You so ugly. If I could get some dough, I'd mash your face in it and make gorilla cookies." I mean, just and the people are just screaming. It's hilarious. So anyway, yeah, Della Reese was another one.
Della Reese. That's who I was
That's who you
trying
think
to.
of Harlem Nights.
Yeah.
Yeah. I watched the years and years ago. I watched because Della Reese I saw in Touched by an Angel too, but years and years and years ago, I want to say I watched a Billie Holiday story, and that was a good but tragic movie. I mean,
Yeah.
she got hooked into drugs and that stuff, so it was. Was it Carlin had said yes? 7 Dirty Words. Yeah, and Thomas the Tank. Yeah, he did do Thomas the Tank Engine. So did Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr was involved in that. But Carlin, one of my all-time favorite skits too by Carlin. Much later, yeah, Touched by an Angel. That's when I saw a lot of Della Reese. But one of my favorite Carlin skits, bring it back to football, is his comparison between football and baseball, and the military terms, of course, with football and baseball. Baseball is played at a park. Football is played at a stadium with names like War Memorial Stadium, Soldier Field, that kind of stuff. And he says the object of football is you riddle the defense with an aerial assault, and you soften them up with your ground game. It's a great routine. I don't remember the whole thing by heart because this was Monty Python. I could do that. The Dead Parrot skit. I can do that almost verbatim. I don't know that whole routine by heart, but yeah, I mean, go just look up George Carlin football versus baseball. It's incredible. It's hilarious, and I always think about that. The object of football, the object of baseball is to go home. I'm going home, everyone. It's hilarious. Okay, so let's look at. I see Jerry's been throwing these up here. What about the Haslam years? What about the Ditka drafts? Well, the thing about once you get to the Tom Benson years, the Saints really seem to knock it out of the ballpark with first round picks. It's hard to find a lot of first round busts. I mean, you look at, let's just say, we'll start with the Jim Mora years. Almost most of his first round picks either end up being a great player or a bust. Jim Dombrowski, great player. Sean Knight, bust. Craig Hayward, great player, but not so much for the Saints. He became a Pro Bowler with the Falcons and stuff like that. Wayne Martin, all-time leader, and second. He's third now. He was second. Third most sacks in team history. Ronaldo Turnbull actually turned out to be an okay player. He didn't lead the team in sacks his first year as a starter. He just never fit in either as a defensive end or a linebacker. Von Dunbar was a bust, blown knee. Then you go back and get Willie Rofe, Hall of Famer. Irv Smith ends up being a bust. That's your 2 first rounders that year. Joe Johnson in 94, one of your best defensive linemen in team history. Mark Fields in 95. Mark Fields ended up being a better linebacker later than he was with the Saints, although he made a Pro Bowl in 2000 with the Saints. Alex Molden, we don't need to talk about him. That should have been Eddie George. Chris Nioli, Ditka's first round pick, actually was a good player. He was part of that great offensive line in 2000, along with the next year's first round pick, Kyle Turley. We know about Ricky Williams, no first round in 2000. 2001, the Saints' all-time leading rushers, Deuce McAllister. 2002, Dante Stallworth and Charles Grant. You know, those are debatable picks. Stallworth was a great player for a year with us. He just did not pan out and got beat out by essentially by Marcus Colston in 2006. But he was a speed threat for us. He was a pretty good receiver. Charles Grant was a pretty good defensive end, enough that we sent Darren Howard packing. That was the number 2 pick that we had in 2000. Then we go to 2003, Jonathan Sullivan. We'll talk about him some more in a minute. But we make up for it in 2004, Will Smith, another great player. 2005, Jamal Brown. He was a Pro Bowler. And in fact, in 2009, we were kind of panicking before that season started because he blew out his knee in 2009. So we had to play a guy who had not played or started or done anything in Jamon Bushrod as your left tackle. And we ended up going to the Super Bowl with Jamon Bushrod as your starting left tackle. So, you know, and they trade Brown after that year. Then Reggie Bush, we know about him. Robert Meacham in 2007. That pick only he was a good player, but that pick only bothers me that we took Meacham instead of Greg Olson. Meacham was good. Olson would have been better, much better. 2008, Cedric Ellis. 2009 is Malcolm Jenkins. 2010, Patrick Robertson. 2011, Cameron Jordan and Mark Ingram. No first rounder in 2012 because we took Mark Ingram. 2013, Kenny Vaccaro. 2014, Brandon Cooks. 2015, Andres Pete and Stephon Anthony. We could talk about that draft class in a minute. And then these guys you all know. Sheldon Rankins, 2016. Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, 2017. 2018, Marcus Davenport. Last year or 2 years ago, Eric McCoy. Then last year, Cesar Ruiz. So, it seems like you either hit it out the park or you get a guy who's a borderline bust. Or a bust. And you're not always picking at the top of the middle of the draft. A lot of times you're picking near the bottom of the draft, especially as you get to the later years with Sean Payton.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to focus on more was which I haven't been on putting up the stuff in the chat recently, so I'll throw some of these on. Avery Perkins quoting the Dead Parrot sketch. Are you familiar with the Dead Parrot sketch from Monty Python? Did you ever watch Monty Python?
No.
Well, Dead Parrot sketch it's how many different ways can you talk about a parrot being dead? He tells him, if you had nailed to the perch, you'd be pushing up the daisies. It's hilarious. This parrot is no more. It has ceased to be. It has run down the curtain and joined the quiet invisible. It is an ex-parrot. He does all these things. He goes, lovely plumage. The plumage has nothing to do with this. It's passed on. It's great because all it is got a guy who wants to return a parrot, and the guy's like, the Norwegian blue, what's wrong with it? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. It's dead. That's what's wrong with it. When I was in grade school, we had listened to so much Monty Python. Between that and doing skits from the Holy Grail, one of our teachers threatened to discipline all the boys if they wouldn't stop doing lines from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. You know, the coconut, how to tell if someone's a witch, all that stuff. We did all that. The holy hand grenade, the knights who said knee, all of it. Oh my God, we were strange kids. It's Catholic school kids for you. Anyway, I go through the whole thing here. Will Smith. Will Smith's one of the better defensive ends. You just didn't realize how good he was until he was gone. You know, Cedric Ellis. I'm in agreement with Ralph Marlborough when it comes to Cedric Ellis. Cedric Ellis was a guy who had that one great year, and Charles Grant kind of had this too, and he got paid for it. Cedric Ellis had this one great year where he seemed to be turning the corner, and he was going to be this impact defensive lineman. You thought you were getting it at the 7th overall pick, and then it's like he's like, yeah, I don't give a shit, you know.
Yeah.
And then he goes and signs with the Bears. He's like, you know what? I'm kind of tired of football. I'm out. You know, I mean, that's so it wasn't so much. I'm not either, Calvin. I actually like Andres Pete. I mean, but I know he has his shortcomings, but I'm not. I don't think he's been garbage. There's been guards on this team that have been garbage, and he's not one of them. Yeah, Malcolm Jenkins is the only player left on the team from the 2009 Super Bowl team now.
Yep.
Because Morstead's gone. But what I wanted to look at was we'll go back to the infamous 19, because here's the thing. When you talk about draft bust class, and we look at the 1987 class because that's got Sean Knight in it. All right. You have to look at the team and say, okay, did they get anybody worth a crap in that draft class? Okay. 87. Sean Knight's the first overall pick, pick number 11 in the 87 class. But we got Lonzo Hill, Mo Hill. We got Steve Trapillo, who actually was a great guard for us. You got Milton Mack. You got Gene Atkins. You got Toy Cook. You know, as you can pick on those guys, especially Toy Cook and Milton Mack, but those guys actually produced for the Saints for a little while. I mean, Milton Mack lasted to 94. Toy Cook to 97. Gene Atkins to 96. He's still one of your best ever safeties. So it's hard to really say, okay, that's a garbage class. I mean, you did have some busts in there, some bad players, but it's not a garbage draft class. The 88 draft class was worse than the 87 draft class because even though you got Ironhead Hayward in that first round, this is the first draft I ever remember watching, by the way. You got Brett Perryman, who ended up being a better player with Detroit than he ever was with us. Greg Scales, who turned out to be a third tight end. But the rest of these guys, special teams guys, Brian Ford, you know, Glenn Darby, Keith Taylor, you know, guys who never played a single down for us, Lydell Carr and Tony Stevens. I mean, that class is worse than the 87 class, in my opinion. But let's go ahead and jump all the way up to let's look at the 96 class, Jim Mora's last draft class. Okay. Alex Molden. We know about him. But I'm going to run through these names, see how many of these guys you remember. Gerard Cherry, safety. Brady Smith, defensive end. Ricky Whittle, a running back. Mercury Hayes, wide receiver. Tom Ackerman, a guard. Terry Guess, a wide receiver. Keno Hills, and Hendrick Lusk. Hendrick Lusk. Do you remember any of those guys?
Not a one.
Okay. Brady Smith actually started a few games for us as defensive end. And I do remember Gerard Cherry trying to start and that's your second round pick, trying to start as a safety for us for a couple of years. These were mainly all special teams guys. Ricky Whittle never amounted to anything. Mercury Hayes, people were convinced because his name was Mercury, he was a speedster receiver. And they thought that was going to be the speed guy, and he only lasted a season. Tom Ackerman and Keno Hills actually were backup offensive linemen. Henry Lusk, he was a tight end who was too short to be a tight end. I want to see I think he was 6'2", maybe 6'1". He was 6'2". And that was the thing about him. He could catch, but he was too small. He was really like a fullback trying to play tight end. And people were like convinced that he could turn into something, but he was too short. I'll see how many people remember him or not. I don't think anybody's going to really remember him. Okay, nobody's mentioned him yet. So, I mean, that was a terrible draft class. That's one of the reasons why Jim Moore got fired. Well, resigned, but was going to get fired because they just were not. You let all these good players go. Sam Mills is down with Carolina. You're letting all these good players go, and you're drafting crap to replace them. You know?
Yeah. You're dismantling the Dome Patrol and doing nothing to replace the player.
Right. And then with Ditka, you know, his big thing was he wanted to try and find guys that could that were, how do you put it, Grabkowskis instead of you know, elite talent. He wanted guys that were hard workers and hard players in college football. So that was going to be his team, a bunch of blue collar players. The problem was with Ditka's picks, if you're maxed out in college, you can't take that next step to play in the pros. So, you know, you just end up getting a lot of junk. Remember Troy Davis? Do you remember that guy from Mike Ditka's draft class in 97?
Running back?
Yep. Little short running back.
From Iowa State.
Yep. He was a 2,000-yard runner, I think, one year at Iowa State.
Yep.
But he had maxed out his potential in college football. That was the best he could be. He wasn't particularly fast or elusive. He just was a hard runner. And he couldn't do that in the NFL, you know. I mean, it's not like Ditka drafted all bums. Keith Poole actually ended up being a good receiver. He was a 4th-round pick. Cam Cleland, if he doesn't go through the hazing incident and get his eye socket beat in, and it was a good tight end, that was 98. But I mean, the rest of these guys, Wilmot Perry. Oh, then we start getting to the linebacker void, which is a different topic we could talk about all day long. But I mean, you start drafting a Chris Badano, Ron Warner. You're drafting. Let me pull up some of these old running linebackers they were trying to bring in.
Kyrie Fort.
Yeah. I have to go up higher because the linebacker era starts with Jim Haslett. We'll start with the 2001 draft class. You get Deuce McAllister. Then you start drafting guys like Cedric Hodge, Kenny Smith, the defensive tackle. Onome Ojo, that guy there has become the symbol of, for me, of players that Saints fans just latch on to and think and put him in the Saints Hall of Fame before he's actually ever played a single game. Mm-hmm. Because that was Mr. August. You remember Andy Tanner, that guy? Okay, Andy Tanner was like the receiver. Everybody started talking about how, Andy Tanner, he just doesn't miss anything. He catches everything thrown to him and stuff. And then he go and play in a game and he can't catch anything. He can't catch a cold. That was Onome Ojo. He had like 4.3 speed and was big and he was lean and he was smoking people in practice in 7-on-7 drills. Come time with his contact, people put your hands on him. He can't break off of a jam. He can't create separation. Defensive backs know everything he's going to do. He alligator arms passes. So, he never makes it. Comes back the next preseason or next training camp, and he looks even bigger, and he looks even faster, and he's catching everything until, they guys put on the pads.
Contested.
Yeah, then he can't catch anything. So yeah, that was classic. That was just classic. Saints fans just going nuts over a guy. I don't know if Troy Davis would or not. He may. He just wasn't particularly fast. That was his biggest thing. He was not very fast. Yes, it did, because it cost us a first and a third in the 2000 draft class. But we made up for it because we did so well that we got value for the players we didn't use. Andy Tanner, Nick Toon, Nick Toon. Nick Toon he was Al Toon's son, so everybody expected him to be like a mini Al Toon, and he had the look and the build of a great receiver, but he had no heart. I mean, that's the thing. He just did not care to sacrifice his body to make the plays he needed to make. Let's look at the 2003 draft class, because this is one of the classes. This was Micky Loomis's first draft. He traded away 2 first-round picks that he had in that class to move up to the 9th spot to take Jonathan Sullivan, because Jim Haslett had to have the heavy lunch bunch, okay? He wanted big, fat defensive tackles to clog up the run so you couldn't run the ball. And if you look at the team he was imitating, the Baltimore Ravens, that was the Ravens' philosophy. Big, strong defensive lineman, and you've got a middle linebacker like Ray Lewis, who's undersized but incredibly fast and incredibly instinctive, that these big guys tie up all the blockers so Ray Lewis has clear shots to get to the backfield, to hit the running back or hit the quarterback, make plays. He has all the freedom in the world. The problem was for Haslett, he had no Ray Lewis back there, and the fat guys he was counting on were busy in the press box buffet, stuffing their faces rather than be there on the field making plays. That's what Jonathan Sullivan, and you remember Grady Jackson?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Grady Jackson had got caught doing that. So, but here's why I can't. You can argue this is probably one of the worst draft classes. There's only one player who actually amounted to anything in that whole draft class. You had Jonathan Sullivan, you took the first round pick. At 37, you took John Stitchcomb. Okay. John Stitchcomb didn't play for 2 seasons, and people wanted to call him a bust, but he ended up being a starter from 2006 on, and ended up being on the Super Bowl team as a good right tackle. So he's really not a bust. He was actually a good player. But here we go with those linebackers again. C. Grant, undersized, supposed to be really fast, but had knee troubles. Montre Holland was a guard. Melvin Williams, a defensive end. Kareem Kelly, a wide receiver. And Tallman Gardner, another wide receiver. None of those guys amounted to anything. And, you're picking, C. Grant was the 86th overall pick. Montre Holland was 102nd overall pick. That's still top 100 players. I mean, you should have got something more value than what you got out of these guys. More bad draft picks. We'll go back a year, 2002. This was Randy Mueller's last draft class. Dante Stallworth and Charles Grant. You get Charles Bentley, who could have been a Hall of Fame center if he doesn't go to Cleveland and get that staph infection that ends his career from a knee injury. But Charles Bentley was a great guard and a great, even better center. But the bad linebackers, James Allen, defensive back Keo Craver, Mel Mitchell, another that was a safety. Here's a guy you may or may not remember, J.T. O'Sullivan. Do you remember him?
Remember the name, yeah.
He actually ended up being a starting quarterback for another team in the NFL. He ended up being a starting quarterback for the 49ers, I think, in either 2008 or 2007. We beat them in San Francisco. He was a starting quarterback. And he actually has a good podcast where he grades draft classes and draft prospects. So he's actually a pretty good guy to follow. John Gilmore, who actually comes back to the team, I think in 2009, maybe as a blocking tight end, and Darius Monroe. I mean, that's, not a very good draft class. 2004. Oh yeah, Lindsey Scott. That's 82 though. Sometimes you get good players from past NFL kids. Sometimes you get that. Sometimes you get, the worst example I think is the tight end Kellen Winslow, the second. His dad was an All-Pro, but he wasn't a very good tight end. J.T. O'Sullivan, UC Davis. 2004 draft class. Will Smith, Devery Henderson, Courtney Watson, another linebacker, Rodney Leslie, Mike Carney, and Colby Buckwalt, another linebacker. Linebackers are just awful. Okay. But you got two good players in Will Smith and Devery Henderson. Okay, 2005, Jamal Brown, Josh Bullock's most frustrating safety I can ever remember. That man could not catch a pass to save his life. The other linebacker, Alfred Fincher. Do you remember him? Do you know what school he came from? Alfred Fincher was from UConn. I think it's the only University of Connecticut player we've ever drafted. And they took him with the 82nd overall pick as a linebacker. They wanted to make him a middle linebacker. Chase Lyman was receiver. Do you remember him? Chase Lyman, do you know his story? Do you remember his story?
The name sounds familiar. I don't really recall, though.
This should have been your warning with this guy. Chase Lyman had a cadaver's ACL and MCL in both knees. They took it out of a dead, a cadaver's leg to repair his own. And he was going to try and be a receiver in the NFL. We draft this guy. And we didn't just draft him like in the 7th round or as an undrafted free agent. We took him in the 4th, 118th pick overall. But we thought we were getting a steal because he was good before all the knee injuries. And now he had cadaver's ACL and MCL, I think, in his leg.
No, okay. That's the same thing with Kikaha when we drafted him. Yeah, he had 3 blown knees in Washington before we drafted him.
Right, but he led the team in sacks, so they thought he could produce. Okay, Adrian McPherson. This is the last quarterback we had from Florida State on this team before Jameis Winston. Do you know the story about Adrian McPherson? You remember him? Adrian. I
remember the name.
Okay, Adrian McPherson was the quarterback who infamously during a preseason game, lined up under guard to take the snap, and the running back had to come over and grab. You can find this picture on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Had to grab him. He was number 5 and point to the center like, "Hey, dude, you're supposed to be right here." And in 2006, we went to Tennessee to play a preseason game, and the mascot for the Titans ran him over with the golf cart and pretty much ended his NFL career. He ended up playing for the Arena League, but he got run over by the mascot driving a golf cart at like a high rate of speed. So, yeah, we seem to think that we were going to get this steal of a draft pick by drafting guys who were hurt, and I'm not done yet. We still got more. We'll go over to the 2000 and let's see where was a bunch of them. Oh yeah, we'll get up there in a second. We'll skip 2008. I thought that was going to be a bad draft class, but we saved it because of Robert Meacham and Jamon Bushrod. That class has Antonio Pittman in it, who Pierre Thomas beat out. So, that was not a very good draft class. 2008 is Cedric Ellis, Tracy Porter, and Carl Nix, all in that draft class. We got Taylor Metalhalf as a kicker. Everybody thought that was going to be the replacement kicker because we let John Carney go, and the guy didn't even make it out of training camp as a kicker. And that was the year we went through, I think, 3 different kickers, including the little shit Martin Gramatica.
Mm-hmm.
That year we had we started out with what was that clown's name from Seattle that we had? Olindo Mare. Olindo Mare started as the kicker, and then we had another guy come in. I think Melhalf tried to come for a little while, and then we ended up with Martin Gramatica, as the final kicker. But it was horrible. That was the year we're like, okay, we really need a place kicker. Bring back Carney no matter what. 2009 draft class. The funny thing about the 2009 draft class, we only have 4 picks. Our first pick and our last pick were actually the good picks. It was the 2 in the middle that were horrible. Malcolm Jenkins and Thomas Morstead. And in the middle was Chip Vaughn and Stanley Arno, another linebacker. Okay. 2010, you win the Super Bowl. You get Patrick Robertson. It's the consolation prize. You get Charles. I've seen enough Brown as your tackle. He was supposed to be a first-round pick. We ended up picking him at 64 in the second round. Thought we got a steal. And obviously he was stealing money because he was not a very good tackle. Get Jimmy Graham, our first LSU player drafted, Al Woods, who ended up not lasting long for the Saints. Matt Tennant, who was going to be the safety the center to replace Jonathan Goodwin, who went on to San Francisco after that year. He ended up getting beat out the following year by first we tried who was that Bears center? I can't remember his
LaPuente.
No, LaPuente is who ended up starting for us. But
he played at Chicago though too.
No, I'm thinking Olan Cruz.
Kreutz.
Yeah, yes. Olan Kurtz, that was the guy, and then he ended up retiring. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, he ended up retiring that year because he was done. But he only wanted to play. He wanted to just get paid a lot, and he only wanted to play to beat the Bears. So instead of Matt Tennant taking over at center, De La Puente, an undrafted free agent, ended up taking over. And that's really what's kind of been saving. I'm going through these draft names, but because we got this talent in the undrafted free agent pool, you kind of forget about how bad some of these draft classes were. This is the one I was going to. This is the one
It's
I was gonna,
it's
oh, go ahead.
arguable that during that time the Saints were getting way more mileage out of their undrafted free agent class than they were their draft classes.
Absolutely,
because you look at people like oh God, drawn blank again. Pierre Thomas,
Lance Moore,
yeah.
De La Puente, well, hell, just start going through some of the offensive linemen we've had in here. Most of those offensive linemen that would step in and start for us for a little while, undrafted guys, actually were pretty good, for what we needed them to do. As you weren't really getting hurt that badly. Jolon Dunbar, undrafted free agent. The linebacker ended up going to the Giants. I can't think of his name right now. He was a pretty good linebacker too. But, those are the guys we could count on instead of, okay, here's a 2011 draft class. After you get past Cam Jordan and Mark Ingram, Martez Wilson, level linebacker, Johnny Patrick, a defensive back, Greg Romas, a guy with a bad back that we drafted as a defensive tackle. Now, granted, we drafted in the 7th round, but still. Nate Bussey, another linebacker who was really probably more of a safety, just terrible players. 2012, after Akeem Hicks, we get Nick Toon, Corey White. I know people just screaming just hearing that name. Andrew Tiller, a guard. Marcel Jones, an offensive lineman. Just, guys that were bums. Rufus Johnson in 2013 in the 6th round that we tried to turn into a linebacker. You had 2013 Kenny Vaccaro, Teron Armstead, John Jenkins, who actually is still playing in the league, and Kenny Stills, but Rufus Johnson at the very end. This is the draft class I was going to get to, though. These two draft classes here, which I think are probably the worst of the past 20 years. 2014, Brandon Cooks. That's your high water mark. And here are the guys that we drafted after him. Stanley Jean-Baptiste. Then we get to the injured group. Kyrie Fournette, linebacker. Vinny Sensuri, safety out of Alabama. Roland Powell, linebacker. And Tavon Rooks, offensive lineman. Tavon Rooks, I think, got cut and picked up by somebody before camp even ended. But I think between Fournette and Sensuri, they had one good leg between the two of them. They had bad knees. Roland Powell, like a great physical specimen, couldn't tackle.
Which is a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was Rob Kelly's problem too, the safety from the Dicka years. 2014 draft class. 2015. Ryan Pace's last draft class. Okay, before we brought in and let take over Jeff Ireland. Andres Pete, Stephon Anthony in the 1st round. Okay, Stephon Anthony's what you got for Jimmy Graham. Haioli Kihaka. Oh, I can never say his name right.
Kihaka.
Yeah, I always want to. It's like there's 2 H's in this thing, the way you say it. Once again, outside linebacker / defensive end, bad knees. Garrett Grayson, P.J. Williams, your favorite cornerback. Davis Tull, another linebacker. Tyler Davidson, the guy who's actually still playing in the NFL. Damian Swan, a cornerback. Marcus Murphy, the kick returner who couldn't hold on to the football.
Yeah.
That's the 2015 draft class. Then we start getting into the good players. 2016, you got 4 good players, and then a guy who actually he was a hard runner. He just blew his knees out. Rankins, Thomas, Von Bell, David Onyemata, Daniel Lasco in the 7th round. You know, we know about the 2017 draft class, 2018 draft class. There's only real one bust in that 2018 draft class. If you think about it, just in terms of guys who didn't do anything in the NFL, you have Davenport, Traquan Smith, Rick Leonard, who we took in the 4th round. Still don't understand why we took him. He was graded a 7th round pick, borderline free agent. We took him in the 4th. But Natrell Jameson and Kareem Moore ended up playing for other teams in the NFL. Boston Scott, Louisiana Tech kid, who's still at Philadelphia, and Will Clapp. That class is a lot better than people think it is.
Yeah.
You know,
Boston Scott was the offense for the Eagles last year.
Yeah. 2019, Eric McCoy, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Saquon Hampton really played up until this year, really. This is the only guys that didn't pan out. Alize Mack, the tight end from Notre Dame, didn't pan out. He was just 7th round pick. Caden Ellis, they still trying to get something out of him. So I mean, you're not getting the grand slam that you got in 2017, but you are getting quality players. You're not getting just total bums. And I think the 2 worst draft classes really of the Sean Payton, Micky Loomis era, probably it's 2014, 2015. Probably 2014 is your worst draft class.
I agree.
Even though you got something with Brandon Cooks, he's not on your team anymore. He's on his 3rd team, 4th team now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 4th team. So,
wait a minute. Is he still in New England, or did they cut him?
No, he's not in New England. He's
Houston.
Yes, he's in Houston now. So he's on his 4th team.
He only spent 1 year in New England.
Only 1 year in New England because he went to the Rams after that, and the Rams overpaid him.
No, he went to the Rams first, and then
we traded him to New England first.
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, we traded him to New England because the rumor was New England wanted that 1st round pick back for us to get that cornerback that everybody wanted so badly, who's with Tennessee, and I forgot where the hell he is now.
No, he just got. I think they just cut bait with him.
Yeah, he's now. Somebody else has him. Yeah, somebody else has him.
Malcolm Brown. No,
yes. Yeah, I think that's who it is. No, not Malcolm Brown. Sorry. Somebody's going to throw it up in a second. Yeah, great value. Richard Sherman. More than great value. That's like the guy who sells the fake Gucci stuff on the street corner. That's the version of Richard Sherman that you got with Stanley Jean-Baptiste. Yeah, Ronald Powell was somebody got hurt a lot, but he was a top high school recruit. He had all the physical tools. He just couldn't play. You mean pathetic jackass, PJ Williams. That's your guy. Yeah, Cooks is in Houston. I thought so. Malcolm Butler. That's who it is. Malcolm Butler.
Butler.
Yeah. The Wish Richard Sherman. When you order Richard Sherman from Wish, you get Stanley Jean-Baptiste. Yeah, that's for damn sure. But yeah, so I mean, that would be my argument. Those 2 draft classes, 2014, 2015, are probably the 2 worst in recent Saints history in the past 20 years. Mainly because you're trying to rebuild your team and your teams are not very good to begin with, and your draft class adds almost nothing to it. And that's what really hurts you. So we're not quite in that situation yet because we had that one great draft class in 2017, and you've got most of that core still there. You lost Anzalone. You let Muhammad go a few years ago, but you still have Kamara. You're going to get Marcus Williams to a long-term deal. You're probably going to sign Lattimore and Ramczyk to long-term deals. So you're still going to keep those core players, but you really need to. It's past time to get a draft class, 4 or 5 guys who can really contribute to your team and be like that 86 draft class was to the 81 draft class and kind of reinforce that whole bit. 2012, yeah. The only reason why I'm not picking on 2012 is because your first pick wasn't until the 3rd round, because you traded away your first round draft pick to get Ingram in 2011, and you lost your 2nd round draft pick because of Bountygate. So when you're picking, your first pick is into the 3rd round. It's hard to grade that draft class because the odds of you having great players picking that low is not very good. So I'm going more 2014, 2015 bugged me because those were larger draft classes. We had more opportunities to get good players, and you didn't do it. You really didn't, and that's really what hurt. No, losing Anzalone really isn't losing much because, he's had his problems with shoulder injuries. He finally started to stay healthy, and he got beat out basically by Quan Alexander. And you saw what happened when you put Anzalone back in the lineup against the Buccaneers. He couldn't cover, and he didn't have the lateral speed to go and make the plays when they throw those short passes in the flat. So that's what really hurts. So those are probably the 2 classes I'm gonna stick as the worst. I mean,
I agree.
Okay.
Those last 2 from Ryan Pace really, it made what we got in 2017 necessary.
I guarantee you, had we not drafted as well as we did in 2017, Drew Brees retires probably after the 2017 season. Quan didn't. No, he's asking if Quan signed with anybody yet. Quan did not sign with anybody yet, and I really don't expect him to, because it's going to take him almost a full year to recover. And after Sheldon Rankins admitted this. He said after his injury, his Achilles injury, it was hard for him to push off for a long time. So, that's really, I think that most teams is like, you know what? It's just easier for us to draft a linebacker. I think Quan Alexander probably will come back, but I don't know how effective he'll be.
Yeah.
Watched a video the other day that showed the average team hits on 2 guys a year. We're averaging 3 since 2016, so we're ahead of the curve. And yes, not having Davis killed us. Yes. It depends on how many picks you get. And that's the thing about what Bill Belichick has mastered. And even though it didn't show this past year, him constantly trading back and hoarding picks and picking up comp picks and stuff, he's increasing his odds that he'll get 3 or 4 players who are going to last. If you get 3 or 4 players in a draft class of 8, you're about 50%. Okay? If you're not getting 3 or 4 players, if you get only 1 or 2 players because your draft class is of 6 players, it stinks. And that's kind of what we got. That's what hurt us in 2014, 2015. Yes, and not Davis Alexander. You're right. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, Sean, any final thoughts? I know you keep looking at the back, checking your meat back there.
Yeah.
Worry about your meat. Any last thoughts on any of this stuff? I know I always end up talking the whole time.
Well, you're more knowledgeable on this stuff than I am.
The draft history of this team, It's hard for me to get excited about it because more times than not, we have terrible draft classes.
It's been more of a tragedy than a triumph most of the time.
And honestly, all I end up doing is writing names down of players that people, and now we have social media, it makes it even worse. People just fall in love with guys, and they'll fight with people, online, and you'll see people get banned from groups because they liked Harold Lloyd or they liked I don't know. Chris Van is somebody who used to really get on my nerves about that. He'd be in love with these guys and just keep beating you up about, we should have drafted this guy. We should have taken this guy. We should have gotten this guy. And I'd start looking at the stats on this guy, and it's like, they weren't really that good. I mean, you get for Eddie, you have Eddie George's out there. I get that. We get Alex Molden, but Eddie George was available. I get that. But some of these other guys, we don't look at the film. We don't see. We don't do the interviews. We don't see how these guys do in these interviews. So it's really, it's a crapshoot, but it's not. It for us, it's a crapshoot. It's just names that we read in a book.
One thing that I learned when I covered the team for PFS was the fact that you can't emphasize enough that guys like Jeff Ireland and Sean Payton.
You want to read that again?
Yeah, let's see
Sean,
again.
Avery says we want to hear about your meat, Sean. Make the ladies swoon. He calls it a brisket. He's been smoking it all day long.
Yeah, brisket and pork butts. And later tonight I'll be doing ribs and pork bellies. So anyway,
you're gonna ask her to pull your pork. I got you, no problem.
Anyway, the one thing that I learned is it's real easy to jump all over teams for the personnel decisions that they make, but we don't have the knowledge of, like you said, those interviews, that film study. Trust me when I tell you, Sean Payton, Jeff Ireland, Micky Loomis, they know more about this than we do. They don't do they always hit on it? No. But, there's a lot more to draft things than looking at a guy that was a major player at the college level and saying, well, he's going to transition right into what we're doing here, because it's not always that easy. It's the right people in the right places with the right leadership, with the right attitude, with the right work ethic. There's so many factors that go. It's just like winning a Super Bowl. You got to be good, but you got to be lucky. You got to be in the right place at the right time. It's never a slam dunk and a sure thing.
I'm gonna start some shit that I know is gonna end up haunting me, and this will be the last thing I'm gonna say tonight. But I think it's funny, and this is not a pro Mac Jones opinion. One of the knocks on Mac Jones is, well, look who he played with. He's got a offensive lineman full of first-round pick. He's throwing the first-round pick wide receivers, and he's got a first-round pick running back he's going to hand off to. Okay. Look at what happened to LSU 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Here you got Joe Burrow throwing the first-round pick receivers, and he's got good offensive linemen. He's got a first-round pick running back he's going to hand off to. It's a lot of the same thing. He's running a pro offense that's complicated even for most pro teams that Joe Brady was running there. Okay, what's the real difference between Mac Jones and Joe Burrow? Well, Joe Burrow had a longer career. Mac Jones kind of came in after Tua had graduated. So he didn't have a chance to put that resume together. But, Burrow had that magical year. And I know Burrow had more intangibles, I think, and more physical gifts than Mac Jones has. I get that. But my point is what you were just saying a second ago. When you play with a top level, elite level college football team and you're playing now in the NFL on a terrible team like the Jets, like the Jaguars, like the Bengals, you're going to get stuck on that kind of team. It's going to be hard for you, unless you're an exceptional talent, to elevate that team to be a championship team like they had in college football. So it's not just drafting the right players, it's drafting the right players that fit your system.
Yeah.
And do what you want to do. And that's the part that most fans don't get, because we all think we know what the Saints need. The Saints need a Derrick Henry. Well, Derrick Henry wouldn't do very well for this team because we're not built around a power running team. We're built around the short pass West Coast offense kind of team. We do much better with an Alvin Kamara than we do with a Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry would be fun as hell to watch, but that's not Sean Payton's kind of offense. We would end up getting frustrated because it would be like, why aren't you running Henry more? Why you keep throwing the ball? Kind of thing. So,
yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. We love you guys. Look for us on Facebook at the Under the Dome podcast page. We're on iTunes. We're on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Peace.
Yep. That's it. All right. Yeah. Thank you guys for sticking with us for so long. I know we went way over time, but we got to fill in this time somehow. And when I took on this thing about the worst draft classes, it was a lot harder to do than the best. But it's kind of what you do. It's draft month. This time in 3 weeks, we'll be getting ready for the NFL draft. It's the 29th, 30th, and 1st. So, and the Saints aren't going to do anything else in free agency. They're really not. So, it's going to be just a question of looking at where our needs are in the draft. That's what we're going to try and talk about next week. What are our most important needs, and what players should we look at? So until next week, thank you guys, and we'll see you next time on Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.